We're going to turn our attention now to the border between the United States and Mexico, where U.S. politics has been focused for a good chunk of this week after President Biden decided to put forward an executive order to allow him to quote unquote shut down the border. A lot to that, of course, and we are very happy to be joined once again here on the show by Todd Miller, who's an author and journalist specializing in border issues. Todd, as always, thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, great to have you
Sorry about that mic issue.
No, listen, these are the challenges of our modern age, as it were.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, great to have you here as always. And maybe let's just start with the executive order and what it really means. I mean, a lot of people saying, oh, Biden is now shutting down the border, blah, blah, blah. But I think beyond the headlines, the content is definitely important.
Yeah, of course. As always, we have to go beyond those headlines. First of all, it's not really shutting down the border. The idea of shutting down the border and putting a close sign on the border, the ports of entry are definitely not shut down. It's a shutdown that's very much directed at people crossing the border, and specifically asylum seekers, and restricting asylum seekers, or pretty much putting a ban on asylum seekers if the number of people, what they call border patrol encounters, surpasses 2,500. So that's the what the executive order does basically. And I mean, there's more stuff to it, but that's basically what it does. But beyond the kind of headline soundbite of it, I think it's important to note a couple things. One is the first thing I thought when I saw it, although it definitely will cause distress for people, especially those seeking asylum. I think we also have to look at this as another act of border theater in the campaign season, right? In this sense, it should come as no surprise. The Biden administration and Biden himself has, since the beginning of the year, pretty much told people that he will go to the right of Trump on immigration issues, border issues. We saw this in February when there was a lot of talk about the border bill, right? If people probably remember the border bill, the Democrats are championing this border bill. The border bill could have been written by Trump himself, right? It had that sort of right wing, what the right wing wants in terms of putting up more walls and surveillance technology and hiring more agents and more draconian enforcement mechanisms, all of that. And when that was rejected in February and pretty much rejected by Trump, by the Biden camp went on the offensive saying, oh, you don't want your own bill, right? Pretty much saying that they were going to be trying to strategically put themselves on the other side of Trump, probably perceiving that would be a sort of campaign weakness. And so I see this new executive order as definitely a part of that election theater, campaign strategy. It's all about trying to garner votes. And there's another thing I just want to mention about this, and I think this one's more important. The kind of going to the right of Trump also doesn't underscore something else that needs to be underscored: the fact that the border and border enforcement and the border buildup, and the fact that asylum restrictions would be announced at all by Biden is also not surprising. It's the border buildup has been quite bipartisan now for decades. So anyone following this for decades should not be surprised at all about this. Should not, even watching how the first 3 or 4 years of the Biden administration and how they started with, campaign promises in 2020 or 2019, 2020, actually, about, bringing a more humane border. But throughout the last 3 years, you can see increasing budgets going to Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, increasing enforcement mechanisms. We're now dealing with the largest budgets for border and immigration enforcement we've ever seen, not to mention the most money going to private companies. So the privatization aspect of the border is higher than ever. And when you put it in this context, and then also in the decades long trajectory of Democrats on the border, from Barack Obama, deporter in chief, 3 million people deported under the Obama administration, the Bill Clinton administration, which started the deterrence strategy that we see on the border. Then you can start to like analytically put this in its correct position, and this is just another layer of this deterrence strategy that really started under Bill Clinton 30 years ago and persists in a bipartisan fashion up to now.
Todd, I'm really glad you raised that. And this has been described as basically a violation of international law. I'm just curious. I know this is a bipartisan effort that we've seen with border militarization, one administration after the next. They're completely in cooperation here. Obviously, Republicans are rhetorically more dangerous in how they describe immigrants, but Democratic policy doesn't really shift or change. It's a part of the same process. So I guess I'm curious, how significant is this latest development, and why is it a violation of international law? And the significance aspect, I'm asking about that in the sense of like, is this worse than anything Trump did?
Yeah. So it violates international law because people have the right to ask for asylum, and so for an administration to say that's restricted is a clear violation of international law. It's also the same exact thing that Trump did. He did this in 2018. He used the same statute in the Immigration and Nationality Act in 2018. It really didn't amount to much, and that's. Other things that Trump did definitely amounted to more. This was actually knocked down by the courts, and the ACLU has said they're going to bring the newest Biden executive order to court as well. If it's going to follow any historical precedent, it'll also be rejected. So that we should see that's probably what's going to happen in the future. But it's basically following the Trump playbook, and that's why it seems to me that these are campaign maneuvers by Biden in that sense, where they must perceive that the border and immigration is a weak link, and they are trying to like preemptively maneuver to what's going to be an onslaught of criticism. In fact, one of the interesting things you see rhetorically at this point is this constant mantra of open borders. The Democrats are all about open borders this, open borders that, open borders the other thing. Anyone who just takes a look at just a cursory glance, or just look at the DHS budgets or anything, right? Any just really superficial 5 minutes of effort can see that the border is not remotely close to being open. It's not under, and yet this sort of perception is just constantly just these accusations are made, and it's actually believed among like huge swaths of population. And it just seems like we're in a delusion, right, around the border. There's a huge, massive delusion. And instead of looking at what really is going on, and looking at what really these policies are going to do, it's all about perception and manipulating perception. And what happens is the people, and unfortunately the most vulnerable people on planet Earth, the ones, in this case, the ones that are looking for refuge, are the ones that are going to pay the consequences of it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that as well, Todd, because I think that misperception is the huge factor. I mean, you study this closely, so I'm sure you've seen how this military age male thing has become the, right-wing talking point. People saying they're building an army, whoever they is, are building an army. So talk more about that if you could. I mean, why are people coming to the United States in such large numbers?
Well, that's a thing. Is it like, what I've seen, the numbers have been down, comparatively speaking. I mean, you can see broader trends of increased amounts of people, but is it just one thing? We know, like, dealing with talking about asylum seekers, there's There's real reasons why people are fleeing different degrees of persecution in countries where they're coming from organized crimes to the police. One part of this is a police state apparatus and kind of the collusion between organized crime and the police state and army. That part of it is often not even discussed, yet the United States is always giving money, military aid to places in Central America, for example, or Mexico, when it's been shown clearly that there's a collusion between organized crime and the police. So there's that part of it, and that often leads to people fleeing persecution. There's also 100,000 other things that why people are coming. It's often multifaceted. There's economic reasons for sure, and one of the things that always it's a kind of a pet peeve or just outright disgusts me, I should say, is this idea that there's something like people that are coming for economic reasons. Well, that's not, people are fleeing for their lives. Well, that's, we can justify that, but if they're coming for economic reasons, well, that's not okay. They don't need to come. Well, why don't we look at why some of the economic reasons, like some of the economic structural adjustment that's happened at the behest of the United States, right? How like economic structural adjustment has benefited corporations. Those U.S. corporations go into countries all around the world and take whatever they want, and then kind of marginalize huge swaths of population. And those are the populations that are migrating. People don't migrate because they want to. In most cases, it's usually because they feel forced to, and not making ends meet is one of those reasons. Some people call it economic violence. There's also environmental reasons, and those are becoming more and more prominent. The climate reasons, you look at Central America, even Customs and Border Protection, and in a report in 2019 was saying, in Guatemala, reason people are leaving are due to food security in these certain departments in Guatemala. And it happened to be these apartments under excessive drought, these excessive droughts that have happened in the last 10 years that climate scientists have attributed to the changing climate. So those ideas, there's what I'm trying to say is it's not usually, there's a bunch of different reasons. And those reasons, if we start breaking them down and unpacking them, I start seeing, oh, wow, the United States is involved in a lot of these reasons. You can look at like economic imperialism, right? You can look at, the United States is responsible for most of the greenhouse gases historically and exceedingly so, right? And when you start seeing the sort of responsibility for some of the reasons why people migrate in the first place coming from the United States, this border building, this border enforcement, this like denial of asylum, this forcing people by the deterrence strategy into deserts, into deadly situations, becomes even more heinous and more imperative to look at very closely.
Well, Todd, as always, we really appreciate you having us here to sort through all of these various important pieces. Todd Miller, author and journalist specializing in border issues. Thanks so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.